Today I have my friends here with me to talk about the Landlord and Tenant Board. What happens at the Landlord and Tenant Board, how you can be prepared for a tenant who is obviously going to contest what your application is being brought to, or maybe the tenant's bringing you to the Landlord and Tenant Board. But obviously there's many problems happening in Ontario with the Landlord and Tenant Board. So you think it's very simple, but sometimes it can get very crazy and very hectic, and there could be lies, even though you're sworn to tell the truth and only the truth and nothing but the truth. They lie. But what can you do about it?
I have a tenant that was behind in rent. It took 8 months to get to the tenancy, to the board. We have a lot of hearings that shouldn't, in my eyes, shouldn't even make a hearing. A non-paying tenant doesn't need to go to a hearing unless there's special circumstances.
If you've never been to tribunal and you've never gone through that process, it doesn't look like court does on TV. And so you're already feeling out of place and anxious. You're up against your tenant who you've already got a bad relationship with. This process has set landlords up to fail.
Thank you everyone for tuning into the Canadian Real Estate Channel. My name is Kayla Andrade and I am with Ontario Landlords Watch. And today I have my friends here with me to talk about the Landlord and Tenant Board. We have many different topics to talk about from the Landlord and Tenant Board. And I think what's the best part is learning from people who A, had to go there, and B, people who have had either good experience or bad experience. It's something to bring you to understanding what happens at the Landlord and Tenant Board, how you can be prepared for a tenant who is obviously going to contest what your application is being brought to, or maybe the tenant's bringing you to the Landlord and Tenant Board. But obviously there's many problems happening in Ontario with the Landlord and Tenant Board, and I want to be able to introduce the people who I brought to you today. Is Connie Cody here to the right. We have Irene King, and we also have Tom Sullivan. So I'll let Connie be able to give you a little bit of who she is so that you can have a deep understanding of where she comes across when we talk about the Landlord and Tenant Board and what solutions we would like to suggest in order to create a fair and balanced housing system. Connie, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Kayla. Hi again to Irene, Tom, and it's great to be here again today. And I've had experience with the Landlord Tenant Bureau with Kayla, and helping as a community advocate. I've helped a lot of people work out their rental issues and tenant-landlord issues, as well as working with Ontario Landlords Watch, reviewing and overseeing the policies, processes that are in place. And since I've been heavily involved in politics, running in the federal election recently.
You sure did.
Anyways, I'm quite involved within the community, and so I've tried to do a lot to make some changes.
Perfect, thank you. Irene, you are a dynamite girl. You got yourself getting good landlords to listen to what you have to say when it comes down to your experience. Now, give us a little bit about you. I know you have some generations. This is in your blood. Real estate is in your blood.
It is. My grandparents started this business almost 70 years ago, and I'm very blessed to still be doing it for them and with them. And with my parents. I'm a third generation residential property owner, first generation commercial. I decided we needed to branch out and diversify. So I love helping new people that are new to the business who may have one or two properties, but we own houses and apartment buildings, and we've had our fair share of trips to the Landlord and Tenant Board. So I believe very strongly in fairness for both sides. And everybody deserves a safe and happy place to live, but we also deserve the right to run our business and to help provide for our family.
Amen, sister. Amen. Tom.
Hi, everyone. I'm a retired CPA and educator. I do have a successful real estate business, and unfortunately, the LTV is part of running a real estate business. I advocate the LTV for both landlords and tenants. Of course, I'm looking for good landlords and good tenants, and hoping to find ways to make the system better, because it's not working for both good landlords or good tenants. It's working for the bad ones only. Bad landlords and bad tenants. So hopefully we can come up with some solutions here.
See, and this is the Ontario Landlords Watch has been advocating for a fair and balanced housing system for many, many years, 10 years. And we've gotten to seeing some improvements over the years regarding, we have Navigate Tribunals Ontario, which is a nice little handy tool that's on the Ontario Landlords Tribunal website, where you're able to put your situation in. They're supposed to give you some resolution, some tips, what to file, what forms to file, but is it enough? I don't know if it is enough to really educate both landlords and tenants about the process, the rules and procedures of going to have to go to the Landlord and Tenant Board. And if you check out the previous videos, we talk about ways to try to deal with tenant management in a way to avoid having to go to the Landlord and Tenant Board. But no matter what we do, sometimes you have to go there. And giving you some deep understanding from our experience of how it happens, making sure that you're reading the Landlord and Tenant Board forms on the Landlord and Tenant Board website in a formality of knowing the instructions, because every day counts, every letter counts, the spelling, the numbers of the application, how many times you gave that application, what are the issues on that N5 application, even though you spoke of one situation on that in particular N5 application for the tenant interfering with other reasonable enjoyment, you cannot bring that up at the Landlord and Tenant Board because it wasn't on your form. So there's lots of education that we're going to bring you here today in order to make sure that you're prepared to go. Because once you get into the Landlord and Tenant Board and you finally get there after we've been advocating to expedite the way that they are trying to deal with these type of hearings and deal with the backlog, we have a concept where you have landlord and tenants and an adjudicator, and what will happen is that whoever brings the application, it's usually your first time to go, and you get to say what you want the adjudicator to know and want the board to know, and then the tenant gets to ask you questions. Then it will be the tenant's turn to present their evidence, and then the landlord can then go and ask the tenant questions, and then they have a conclusion, and then they get to conclude what they would want the board to do. So you think it's very simple, but sometimes it can get very crazy and very hectic, and there could be lies, even though you're sworn to tell the truth and only the truth and nothing but the truth. They lie, but what can you do about it? Now, I want to be able to jump in and talk with Tom, because I know, Tom, you do your part, you do what we need to do to make sure we're screening and getting, but sometimes you get, good tenants gone bad. Sometimes we have good tenants gone bad and we need to go to the Landlord and Tenant Board. You want to share your experience with the Landlord and Tenant Board, what issue you have with the Landlord and Tenant Board, and what you would recommend to the Landlord and Tenant Board to change?
The biggest issue I have with the LTB is the time. It takes way too long to get to a hearing. Yeah. And that's for both a landlord and a tenant. And I'm going to first talk about a landlord. So I have a tenant that was behind in rent. It took 8 months to get to the tenancy, to the board. 8 months. I was able to withhold it. But for a first-time landlord, and they only have one property, they can't carry a loss of that size.
It's devastating.
I could, because I have multiple properties, but it's not something I could do constantly. And that's only going to hurt other tenants, because that's lost income that I have to recoup from other tenants. So that's going to jack up the rates. Yep. But use the same kind of scenario for a tenant. And I've known this happen because they had a bad landlord. Their furnace went out just after Christmas. If they have to file an L1, I think it's a T2 that they have to file against the landlord to try and get heat back in their house. Mm-hmm. If it takes 8 months for them to get the heat back, it's the summertime. They don't need the heat anymore. But they just went through the entire winter freezing the butt off. How is that efficient for anybody? So we have a lot of hearings that shouldn't, in my eyes, shouldn't even make a hearing. Yes. A lot of this stuff could be streamlined and answered by, we don't even need the adjudicators to answer some of these stuff. Like, to me personally, a non-paying tenant doesn't need to go to a hearing unless there's special circumstances. Mm-hmm. So why can't we submit all of the information, the tenant submit all of their documentation, be reviewed, and determine if it needs a hearing? And I can bet you statistically 95% of the cases do not have to go to a hearing. Yep. That would clear up the system for the real cases to be heard, to get rid of all of the derelict apartments out there because landlords are not maintaining them, or tenants are not maintaining them. That's a big issue.
Yep.
If we can address that, it will be better for everyone.
Mhm.
It's not for one side. I'm always looking how to improve it for everyone. And if they did that, guess what? More landlords, more tenants, more apartments, better pricing people. Hey, isn't the government always advocating for affordable housing?
Yeah.
I just saved you money, government. I just saved you money from the hearings, money from having to host tenants into motels at $5,000 a month. So now they can be hosted in an apartment for $1,200 to $1,500. Shake your head. Come on.
The concept is we do have that backlog at the landlord and tenant board, and we do have our tenants who obviously are having some heating issues. Let's say we'll go on your example, but the best thing that for the tenants, what they do have, they always have property standards, and usually when they call property standards, they're coming in, they're giving a landlord a time frame in order to do it, and then if not, it's going to get done and it's going to be put to the landlord's property taxes. So we do have that concept of making sure that tenants definitely for the necessity of rental units, but they do have a concept like we just talked in the beginning about, here's a form that I'm coming to you regarding one issue, but more issues have came about in the time frame of me filing. But guess what? We got to file again and again and again. It's like, why can't we just take on the entire relationship? Here, let's hash it out. Here's the relationship. This is what I'm asking. This is why I can't do this anymore. Why can't we work ourselves into it? So we get that concept where it can go back and forth multiple times, but most importantly is that even when you get to your hearing and you're giving your evidence, and then they don't even give you their judgment at the end of the hearing, they tell you it's going to be in writing, and that writing is now could take 30 to 60 days before we can get in writing.
Or longer.
Or longer, because it could fall through the cracks. So obviously the landlords and tenants are being denied access to justice. And that's where we get our concept of trying to provide a fair and balanced housing system with, like Tom said, we have a lot of situations that don't need to have a full-on hearing. A hearing that has taken so long that it was painful to watch it the other day, where we have people going for at least 2 hours trying to say, my family needs to move into my property, but my tenant is accusing me that I'm doing it in bad faith. In reality, there's so many punishments for landlords who want to do it in bad faith that you could receive a $50,000 fine for someone who is a residential, like a small residential landlord, and up to $250,000 fine for a corporation, and not to mention general compensation to the tenant up to 1 year of rent for bad faith. So it's more like you're always considered to be guilty before to be proven innocent. So it does drag on another process that does not need. And how many times, if you look at what's happening in the real estate world, buy, sell, like how many of our rental units are being sold, and how many tenants do we have disputing it because the form clearly says you can dispute it. Irene, what do you got for me? Don't get me started. I tell you.
Well,
hair
we've had a lot of experience with this, and I truly feel this is a relationship, and landlord and tenant, there needs to be a process where we can look at each other and say, listen, the Ontario standard lease is for 1 year, and after that it automatically goes month to month. There's no end for a landlord. At the end of that lease, the tenant gets to dictate what happens. There needs to be something where the landlord can say, listen, this isn't working. I'm not throwing you out tomorrow, but here's your 90 days notice that this relationship, you're not happy, I'm not happy. There needs to be some recourse for a landlord to take back their unit that isn't shady business, that doesn't look shady, where it looks like, listen, the landlord is not happy with the tenant. Because again, I'm not talking about maybe one of my multi-res properties. I'm talking about, a family who's maybe renting out their basement, or they're renting out a house because they know in a few years their child is going to be going to university in that town. And they want to rent out that space. They want to make a little bit of money, but they're not adequately equipped to have to deal with maybe a tenancy that isn't going as well as they had hoped. The number one thing that I can say about the Landlord and Tenant Board for somebody who has never been is to document everything. so many times in our tenancies, a conversation or an email or, a general, chat out in the parking lot, or maybe even a text message, if that's how you communicate. And you don't keep track of it. You think, oh, it was no big deal. It's not worth writing down. When you finally get to tribunal, whether it was landlord taking tenant or tenant taking landlord, those moments, those interactions matter. And even as a business with multiple units, so many things happen with our tenants that we don't document because it feels like nothing at the time. The tenant in I don't know, I'm going to pick a unit 909, says, oh, my fridge is broken. And we send someone that morning, right away, fridge is repaired. We don't think anything of it, but we need to have that work order. We need to have that documentation. So in another week or another month or 6 months down the road, when that tenant says, oh my gosh, my fridge has been broken 25 times, we've got something. We've got something in hand.
Exactly.
And then the other piece of information that I would love to share with people about the Landlord Tenant Board is mediation. And if anyone from the provincial government is listening to this right now, please allow us more time for mediation. Let us go to mediation with our tenant a day or two before our hearing date, because that will once again clear out that hearing room. So many disputes could be resolved if landlord and tenant were placed not necessarily in the same physical room, but in the same Zoom room with someone who has the ability to mediate a conversation between them.
Mediate, but with a mediation conversation that could eventually be whatever was discussed there should end up at the hearing. They have mediation being offered prior to a hearing. It backlogs the system in itself, and whatever happens in that mediation stays in that mediation, and that's where it shouldn't be. That's why a lot of people are, landlords are like, no, I'm not doing mediation. I'm skipping. I'm going right to the hearing, because we know that honestly, it's almost like a delay tactic if nothing comes about it, right? So
I also feel that one of the reasons why that's happening to a lot of newer investors or smaller landlords and property owners is because the first words out of the adjudicator's mouth is duty counsel for the tenant. But a landlord, there was a tiny little print on the bottom of the form where you could call a phone number, be put on a wait list, and get a call back from somebody maybe in 3 to 6 weeks, if you're lucky, to ask you for your legal help. So unless you are able to come to tribunal with your own legal representative, you're already feeling that you're at a loss. If you've never been to tribunal and you've never gone through that process, it doesn't look like court does on TV. And so you're already feeling out of place and anxious. You're up against your tenant who you've already got a bad relationship with. This process has set landlords up to fail, to intimidate them, to terrify them, and to let them think that whatever that adjudicator or person says, oh, yep, yes, of course, yes, I'll do that, yes. Yeah. And so when you have a chance to mediate, when you have a chance to not just talk about that one issue that's on the table, but maybe everything, it frees up that property owner. That landlord can actually speak a little bit more freely in that space, in my experience. Yeah. And if we were able to resolve those issues at mediation a day or two beforehand, great, done. Order on consent, signed, sealed, delivered, it's in the mail. If not, then as you were saying, that information needs to be shared with the adjudicator. They need the full picture to be able to resolve these issues and speed things up for both landlords and tenants.
And that's where, like, I've spoken to, at the board for many landlords myself, and when I actually had my own hearing, and that's just like, it's just the tenant still pays on time, keeps the place clean, everything's good. It's just ticking over some common space areas. And when you get there and you're in front of this camera and everyone's watching, like my mouth was like drying up and I couldn't speak and my hands were shaking. I'm like, Kayla, what's wrong with you? You know this stuff. But they make you like you don't know what because they don't give you much education on how this is going to, you know, flow into the hearing for the people. But getting to know that you need to be able to bring up other issues that have accumulated. I've said to my hearing, I'm like, okay, here's my N5. We're here to talk about this issue on the N5, but there's more issues that I'm going to need to do, that I need to deal with. But what you want me to do is slap another N5 to my tenant and another N5, and now we're just building this dispute process with your tenant over and over
It's very
again.
cumbersome. And
If you don't mind my saying, did you mean another N5 or did you mean a second N5? Because those are two completely different things. And a lot of new landlords don't know that.
Yeah, so to clarify, so you got like an N5 application, let's say that it was, you know, stuff to be removed out of a garage, but now we have stuff that needs to be removed out of the laundry room. So because you put it in underneath, you know, one situation, you can only speak to the adjudicator on that in particular issue. So now you got to go and give another application of an N5 to talk about that in particular issue, and they have 7 days to correct that behavior. And sometimes you can address, you know, and know if they've corrected it within 7 days, and sometimes you really don't know, and then you've got to show proof that they have corrected it, or they have to show proof in order for them to correct it. So the system in itself and the forms in itself, that's the part that usually gets people into a lot of trouble with the landlord and tenant board, because one small mistakes, one lack of clarification, time and dates, like, and if you're fumbling within your words and you can't show without a doubt this is happening, the adjudicator can dismiss that type of application.
But on top of that, it's just a matter of time. Like, it's valuable time of everybody's hard efforts on both sides, the landlords and of the tenants and of the adjudicators. And with that time comes costs. You've got costs of the landlords, property managers, and the adjudicators as well. And you have the payments of all the fees that have to go in. So now you're adding these expenses on, which actually then goes to rental costs going up as well. And the more that we have an inefficient policy at the Landlord and Tenant Board, we're actually having a major exodus of landlords. And what we need right now are rentals. We need a lot of rentals, especially with the housing affordability being an issue here and the prices of houses going up. We need our landlords. We need our rentals. Mm-hmm. And if we keep on having policies and processes in place that are chasing away our landlords, we're going to have less rentals. Less rentals mean higher prices and more people that are homeless. So we're adding to the issue of our homeless crisis. So we have to look at everything overall and cumulatively. And mediation is good. There's a lot of simple solutions to simple matters that could be dealt with very quickly with a mediator. Sometimes it's the relationship between the landlord and tenant where the communication is broken down. So this is where a quick mediation could actually help resolve it, to give an understanding so that there's no hard feelings on either side or a communication issue. But we don't have to always bring it to the LTB to be disputed.
Mediation within a month of filing, you know, a month of filing gets mediation happening. So that way, you know, are still in queue in order to have your hearing. But if you've agreed, you still have your date for that type of hearing. And again, like Connie was just mentioning, you know, this back and forth with my tenant, you know, she now has to pay the $186 because we're at the board, and you now have to pay the $186. And because I can't talk about the other issues, I need to bring them to the board. Now you're going to pay another $186.
So it just keeps on adding.
Who is it really hurting here? If the government's out to really protect the tenants or whatnot, how are we actually being able to make sure that it's been fair for all parties, when I don't really want to have these tenants pay this type of fee, but I'm not going to pay it because you refused to listen. Irene, you were going to mention something. I think I was cutting you off and going on.
No. I was going to tell you a super quick story about an issue that really came down to what form we filled out. We had a tenant in a multi-residential property that was setting fires in the stairwells.
Oh, yeah.
And unfortunately, at the time, we did not have a camera at that property. This was before cameras were really everywhere. We had witnesses. We had we had paperwork. We had a paper trail. We served the N5, and we were waiting for our court date. On day 7 of 7 days to correct, they of course had done it again. So we had served them the second N5. So we had all of our paperwork. That's when we went for our court date. 3 days later, they set a fire, not on the in the stairwell, but on a balcony. When we got to court, we had also tried to file illegal, is it N6 for illegal activity. The tribunal refused our application because we only had the fire department. We didn't have the police report number. The police, it became a, there were so many moving pieces. But what it ended up coming down to is because the fire had happened on the balcony instead of in the stairwell, the adjudicator didn't feel that it was significant enough that we needed to evict the tenant because it wasn't the same type of incident. And again, this was something awful. I'm looking out for the safety of my other tenants.
Yep.
And I really thought, I've got a tenant setting fire. This is pretty straightforward. I need help here. I should have hired a paralegal for that because it ended up that the tenant was allowed to stay and it took another year for us to be able to get them out.
See, and
that goes back to the government doesn't want to have to house the tenants themselves because they're getting it done for, I'm going to guess here the cost is less than $2,000 the tenant was paying. But for them to put them up in the hotel, it's going to cost them $5,000. They don't want to pay that $5,000. They rather landlords eat the cost, and it all comes back to using common sense. I was at Kangaroo Court back in end of August. The number of cases there to settle for under 100 or actually under $200 was astronomical. I'm like, this is just a waste of everybody's time. $200? Come on, guys. Your time of that day is worth more than $200. Now, did they get caught up and only owed $200 by the time of the hearing? I don't know, but still, at that time, it should have been, okay, let's just end it. Let's start using common sense. Let's get everything done. Streamline the process. Mediate. Technically, we're allowed to mediate ourselves, but good luck sending that paper in because they're just going to dispute it saying, oh, that's not what I agreed to, even though they signed it.
Yeah.
Or I signed it under duress.
Tom, we just had a Facebook Live with one of our landlords who had their tenants sign an N11, so the agreement for both landlord and tenant to agree to end the tenancy. And based on the concept of having the tenant not moving out at the end of July and having to go to the board, when there was a consent form, obviously what the judgment came out to say, you now have to leave because you signed an N11. Well, the tenant had put a stay. So they put a stay, so the tenant was allowed to stay in that rental unit until another hearing was scheduled where they were able to vouch why they believe they need to stay. And I guess based on the concept of that the tenant,
I remember this one,
that he couldn't read or write, and he thought he was signing a new rental agreement for a tenancy that was already going on for 10 years. And there was a lot of communication and text messaging back and forth informing this tenant that you do have to leave. My daughter does need to move into the place. And even though he said rental form on there, the adjudicator took this that, yeah, he may have gotten confused because he doesn't know how to read and write, and denied the application. Didn't postpone it, didn't, work out, a different time where he's going to be able to leave to give him some time to find a place. They denied it. Now we go back into the problems at the Landlord Tenant Board, and I wanted to look at all of the adjudicators. You can find out their backgrounds of who these people are at the Landlord Tenant Board online. And when you get to see where they come from, where their past experiences, I feel that some of them are bringing their past experience of being a social agency and bringing that into the Landlord and Tenant Board, where yes, you want to help people and the homelessness and the Trillium and social benefits tribunals, but and they couldn't, or they struggled to, and now they're able to come into the Landlord and Tenant Board, help make judgments to keep people in their homes so that they are not overwhelming the taxpayer system. Because like Tom said, depending on what city you're on, like my region had told me it's about $3,000 a month that they house people inside of short-term, motels. Is this cost effective? Let's get our government official over here. Well, she's not. She should have been. She should have been.
Definitely not.
You should have been. So Connie, like, she obviously understands, like, there's a multiple moving parts, I think, to the housing industry in itself. And that is going to be, we have people who are homeless who want to have a house. There's people who are homeless who don't want to have a house. And then we have people who are in government housing, and then we have people in the private sector of things. And we like to look at everything as a whole as we make these suggestions, because that gives us more of a wraparound system that is needed. Now, what was your concept with the Landlord and Tenant Board and how they're controlling who gets evicted and not getting evicted? What would you say from our government official, like, as you being our government, let's say?
I'm not the government. I can't speak for
that. You got that. They don't want me ever in politics. Oh my God, I'd be kicked out within a week.
Yeah.
But if we have you and you've seen what the Landlord and Tenant Board is and what's happening, what would you want to change from the government stance in order to make this fair and balanced?
Well, we definitely have to streamline the process. We have to change a lot of processes. We don't want to increase homelessness, but we also don't want to get rid of our landlords. So it's a really fine line to and make sure the balance is there. But we have to make sure that it is a fair and balanced process that is at the LTB. And it also has to be cost effective, because it's actually being paid by tax dollars as well. So the longer these things go on, it's like money being driven into a situation when that money could actually go for housing and help with subsidies and stuff like that exist. So when we're looking at housing and homelessness issues, it's gone back for how many decades. And so there's a lot of broken policies and processes that are in place. So we need to actually review them, review the legislation, review the funding, and make sure that there's accountability and transparency as to how things are actually working. And it's not a one-size-fits-all situation, nor do we have what they say is a silver bullet for a solution. But we have to look at individual things, because there's different levels of homelessness, and some are temporary, some where you can go to a shelter, but like sometimes a family with young children don't want to go into the shelter system. We don't have anywhere for them as well. So from the when you're looking at the LTB, I can see where they don't want to end up creating a situation where people end up having nowhere to go. But so we have to streamline, make sure that the policies are more balanced between landlord tenants, so that we're not chasing landlords away. So we have more rentals available. And those are all things. And as soon as we have more rentals available and more rules in place, especially with non-payment of rent, because that does take up a large percentage of the cases at the LTB.
Yeah.
And so there shouldn't be a reason for that at all. So if we had other things in place to make sure that that's not there, and start bridging the gap between the landlords and tenants, and get rid of our bad landlords, as well as making sure that where there's bad tenants or holes within the policies that create these lengthy delays, if we resolve them, then we can slowly start bridging the gap to repair it all.
And this is where you go and you look at the Landlord and Tenant Board and how they're supposed to be more of a mediator and dispute resolution officer. And sometimes we feel like we're fighting up against them. And this is the hard part, where we see them connecting with us. We see them, explaining to us first before it's released of what's happening, getting a consultation on what our opinion is, what should be changed. But I think there's going to be more of an inclusion of all levels of government. We need to get the Landlord and Tenant Board. We need to get the Attorney General. We need all levels of government, from municipal to regional to provincial. They need to be connected to each other, and that's where there's a disconnect, because the federal government can pass money to the province. The province can go and give it to the region, and that's where the broken chain is, where it comes down. But I'd like to see that as we consult it with the Landlord and Tenant Board and saying, hey, a lot of these problems are the government not coming out with doing their funding. They have a lot of different programs that help people with rent arrears or last month's rent deposit, but they don't do it well connecting that information to the landlord or to the tenant. And if they do give out rent arrears, it's usually the tenant is the only person to be able to apply for it. So luckily, through Navigates Tribunals Ontario, as a tenant is on there and saying, hey, I can't pay my rent, a nice little window will pop up there and say, here's a link to your local service manager, giving these people some access to where they can get some funds. If we get this information to people a lot sooner, that is the process of, be able to keep the cost down, not putting them into motels at $3,000 a month. Like, they could be having a whole house for themselves right now if you look at what we're paying to deal with the affordable housing and the homelessness, because the government cannot keep building, managing, and maintaining and subsidizing government housing.
What we have to do, though, is make sure that the funding's there. Like, we've had this housing strategy that's been implemented since 2019. We've already been over half of the funding has been going out. But if you look at the price of lumber, the cost to develop new homes and stuff like that, the prices are going up. Land is going up in price as well. So when the determination of how much funding is going from the government to pay for the province and going down to the municipality, and a lot of it ends up falling down on the responsibility of the municipalities, with the prices going up, it's the funding that was available for it is no longer sufficient. So we have already now a system that was put in place that is based on old pricing, old costing, and it's no longer going to meet the needs. Then you've also got the delays with getting new houses built. You're looking at sometimes 10 years or plus before a developer can get more housing. Mm-hmm. We also haven't looked at new ideas where a lot of development is very narrow, 3 stories high, doesn't meet the needs of a lot of people who are for accessibility or for seniors who don't want stairs in the house. We have a lot of seniors in large homes that are staying there, but they only live on the main floor. And if we had suitable housing for these seniors in more of a bungalow type setting, then these other homes would be available, could be turned into multi units.
We're the solution.
So, like
we're the solution.
These are the types of solutions to be out there. And we also, I think, need to actually combine developers with landlords. So when we're doing development, that we're actually putting in rental units right at the top, like secondary suites or even duplexes, triplexes, and all these.
I get a lot of phone calls about that.
Yeah. And we also have to think about, like, every day there's someone that's turning 65 or retiring, and the baby boom is there. We don't have housing that suits a lot of the seniors. And for accessibility, not all of them want to move to a condo. They want their garage or their backyard. And even with this pandemic that's happened, we're seeing people that are moving away. They can work from home. So we actually have to start looking at, over these past 18 months, having a new concept of how we want our development to look, how we want our neighborhoods to look. And we have to meet those needs. And I think instead of just having development, we actually have to include landlords, property management.
Being a part of that table, the discussion
we've got to
table.
combine all this together, because I think together we can have better solutions. And that's right from the federal, provincial, regional, municipal levels. Is
call it a task force.
Work together.
It's a task force. We need to work something, because as you can see, we need to have all these solutions, and they're great about, developing and encouraging supply. But if we have landlords or even new investors going, hey, I want to get into it, and they see the Residential Intensive Act and Landlord Tenant Board the way it is, are they going to be wanting to jump into it 2 feet? They're not. So this is why we have to do what we can to talk about these type of issues. And I'm sure that Irene and Tom and many others that I can bring to you guys as well is going to share from their experience of what it is. But let's give we want you to win your hearing at the Landlord and Tenant Board. We want to go around, everyone give us a tip for the viewers about how to win your case at the Landlord and Tenant Board. Irene.
Have copies of everything. If you're bringing pictures, make sure you have 3 copies. If you're presenting over Zoom, make sure you have it on USB drive ready to go. Read all your documentation from the Landlord and Tenant Board, because the Landlord and Tenant Board does not accept USB drives. So if you have photos that you are submitting for your court case, you have to find another way. You have to call them and submit them another way. So just pay attention.
Read evidence through email and making sure that it's in 7 days prior to your hearing.
And don't be afraid to ask for help from another landlord.
Lots of them in the community, especially Irene. You can find her in Ontario Landlords Watch members group on Facebook and say, hey, this is my situation. Yep. This is what my court date is. You won't know your adjudicator until the day of, but as soon as you find out, do some Googling on there and find out, where their background is, how should you be presenting to them? Tom, give us some tips. I know you got a lot of them.
Be prepared. And by that, follow everything Irene said, and actually go on a few case hearings beforehand, so you can learn the lingo. If you don't know the terminology to be using, hire a paralegal. They will help you get your case heard and answered quickly. Outside of that, just stay calm. Don't let don't get agitated at the hearing. Don't let if you're a landlord, don't let your tenant goad you into it, and the vice versa. If you're a tenant, don't let the landlord goad you. The more calm you are, more rational you are, the adjudicators will actually try to help you, even the landlords, depending on the adjudicator you get.
All depends.
Yeah.
What's that? Section 73 you want? Did I hear?
And
No, it's
I hate to
78.
say it, from landlords, go to mediation.
Mhm.
I swear to God, if the adjudicator hears that you're not willing to go to mediate, they are going to go after you more harshly than if you went to mediation. So if you have a small error, they will fix it. They'll help you fix it. I've had some adjudicators fix typos. Well, other ones will just wipe it out, but they actually went to mediation first.
Yeah, same. I deny mediation.
Yeah, just try to work with them.
Like me.
Use common sense, even though I know the system doesn't use common sense, but try to use common sense in your business. That's all.
And that's where it is, honestly. Like some of the other parts of the world and other parts of Ontario or in Canada, so to speak, it's that, you know, sometimes they don't even have a paralegals at all. It's always just the landlord and the tenant, and you're going in there with the basic knowledge of, you know, this is my house, this is what I don't like about it, and they go through the rules. But sometimes they make it so complicated, and they drag it out, and they adjourn these hearings, and they delay these hearings, and they apply for a stay, and the stays and the time frames of, you know, waiting 14 days before you can apply to the board, being able to wait 30 to 60 days or more, you know, to get your order, and waiting still months to get a hearing. And that's what our job is, to still try to work different solutions to the landlord and tenant board in order to speed up that process so that people are getting access to justice, but at the same time knowing that we have 1 month of last month's rent into consideration, but it's going to take us a lot longer than that to even get an order. That's where the system's been unbalanced, and we have to speak up, and we're going to continue to keep speaking up about this, because what we're doing is like informing the government, hey, this is what's wrong. We're informing other landlords, you know, what to prepare for, and as they get into this journey or want to stay in this journey. But it's really important to understand that the landlord and tenant board is very off balance. We don't have any consistency with our adjudicators, and that's something that we're really trying to work forward now. But the good news is, guys, they do have some type of little system coming. It's like going to be a system of online. It's going to be able to run it's called a portal that they're calling it, and it's going to be a way for us to communicate with the landlord and tenant board, upload your information to there, and also be able to provide your evidence inside of that portal as well. Fingers crossed it's good, and it's speeding up that process so that we are able to get ourselves into a hearing within 4 to 6 weeks from actually filing, and that was the goal for them. But again, I want you to know that the Ontario Ombudsman is actively investigating the Social Justice Tribunal still. So please make your complaint. If you have an issue with the Landlord and Tenant Board, make your complaint to the Ontario Ombudsman so that they understand that, yes, there is some changes that have happened, but yes, it's still a mess, and we do need to be able to try to do our best in order to figure out the system that is going to provide access to justice, where that we can create that environment where we can entice more people to want to get into this industry, because I know right now there's a lot of N12s taking it over for their own personal use, and we have to ask ourselves why. This is a really good industry to be in. It's still a good industry to be in. There's still lots of good deals, but I want you to be very, take that blindfold off. Don't go into the Landlord and Tenant Board with that blindfold, and document, document, document. Connie, anything to say?
No, I think everything here is really good. From you guys more are the experts in being landlords and dealing with the LTB, but I think that people are starting to listen, and changes will be made. That's great.
So we're going to get Connie back on as well, and Irene and Tom, because we really want to be able to talk about government involvement and where we see it broken within the levels of government, what they're doing to not really encourage but discourage investment within the cities, and different policies and bylaws that obviously are affecting and impacting the housing industry, because it all is connected together. It has a domino effect. If you're liking what you're hearing today and all the different different type of tips and advice that we want to give you, definitely subscribe to the Canadian Real Estate channel and make sure that you're catching our other videos and other guests that we're going to have on. But until we do this again, I want to thank everyone for watching. For Connie, you can get hold of her through me as well. We're going to hide her away from people right now, but you can contact me on Ontario Landlords Watch members, as well as Facebook, Kayla Andrade. And then Irene, can you give us some information on how we can get in touch with you?
Our company website is Tobis, TOBIS.ca, and you can reach me through there.
Awesome. Tom?
You can reach me at bestchoicerentalproperties@gmail.com.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much for joining this conversation. This is about us working together as that team effort, and eventually, you know, each block would be a level of government where we're all talking together, right? And this is our goal, is to create a fair and balanced housing system for good landlords, good tenants, and taxpayers. Thank you so much for watching the Canadian Real Estate channel, and we will see you soon. Take care.
Bye.